Hi folks, welcome to the Supply Chain Code, an online show by Supply Chain Asia. In our shows, we aim to provide a simplified perspective to complex and challenging issues relating to logistics and supply chain management. In this episode, we'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the pharma and healthcare supply chain. We have invited Mr. Teo Wei Yong, Executive Director, Global Sourcing and Procurement in Asia Pacific from Merck & Company, or MSD, to share his personal views and opinions on how the pandemic has affected this particular sector. So let's get started after our opening credits. Welcome back. There's only one thing certain about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the pharmaceutical supply chain. Uncertainty abounds. The heavy reliance on China for raw materials, intermediates and APIs, as well as India for generic drugs products remain a significant concern. Distribution is also affected by disruptions to the global supply chain as well as clinical trials. A high level of ambiguity is expected to remain until the spread of this highly contagious virus is halted. The COVID-19 pandemic is quite obviously both a health crisis and an economic disaster across the world. Since the shutdown of manufacturing activities in China and India, there have been questions regarding the impact of the pharmaceutical supply chain due to this crisis. But first, is there a difference between healthcare and pharma supply chain?
So basically, the healthcare is actually pharmaceutical is part of the healthcare industry, or what we call the healthcare and life science industry. So within this very broad term, we have pharma, that is really drugs manufacturing. You have medical devices. You could have biotech, and then the hospital, the healthcare infrastructures. So if you think about a drug manufacturing process, typically you will move from raw materials to packaging, and then from the drug manufacturer you move to the distributors. The distributors either goes into the hospital or the pharmacist, and then you think about the hospital ecosystem. When drugs arrive, you have patients coming in, some doing surgery, then you have medical devices deployment, you have personal protective equipment, surgical masks, and so forth. So very broadly, the pharmaceutical supply chain talks about everything from manufacturing to the healthcare professionals and the distributor side, and then in some cases refers basically what is happening within the hospital ecosystem. So whatever is within from the point a patient goes into the hospital all the way to drugs dispensing. If there's a independent pharmacy hospital, that will be part of the healthcare ecosystem. But very broadly, everything falls under the healthcare and life science supply chain umbrella.
While some manufacturing was restarted in April in China, the virus continued to spread in many parts of the world. So how has the pandemic affected the pharmaceutical supply chain? How has the current pandemic, COVID-19, affected pharmaceutical supply chain, especially from your side, right? Because you're a procurement specialist, as procuring materials for, in this case, for MSD.
Well, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, when we started in China, one thing that not just our companies, a lot of companies face a challenge is the procurement of PPE equipment and surgical masks. So for a couple of months, mask was in short supply. It was very hard to get hold of it, but you need it to ensure the safety of your manufacturing personnel, people working at the key sites, to ensure that they are protected. From a raw material standpoint, we are actually covered quite well from our side. I think the pandemic actually triggered some term thinking about alternative sources for the industry itself, because China is the biggest supplier of API globally. And when that actually happens, coupled with some of the previous actions that the government has taken on the industry, there was a shortage of supply for a period of time. So I think it actually prompts people to look into their supply chains of raw materials deeply. And now that I think things are beginning to return to normal in most cases, so I think there's a balance. But it actually ties back to inventory building, longer term contingencies, dual supply, and so forth. But I think at the beginning, definitely it was quite challenging to respond to something that no one really has actually encountered before.
Yeah, use the word or the acronym API. I have a lot of tech friends here, and also a lot of my guys who are watching, the community members who are watching are also from a lot more familiar with the technology industry. In technology industry, API refers to the application processing, or I can't even remember what is it, but it's basically a term to interface across multiple systems. What really does API mean in the pharmaceutical world?
So API is called active pharmaceutical ingredients. So if you think a drug, um, a chemical setup, you need chemicals to actually target against a certain benefit. So it will trigger certain benefits. Those chemical compounds, generally speaking, will be called API. Then the other part of it is called expedient that really helps with the delivery of the drug in the bloodstream or so forth. So it's a core ingredients to make a medicine or make a drug in manufacturing.
So do you acquire APIs?
That we do buy APIs as part of our manufacturing process as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I have my interesting trainee who tell me that API stands for Application Programming Interface. Okay, so Theo just explained that API stands for Active Pharmaceutical Ingredients. But Theo, I know one of the more exciting part that we are all watching in the world today is that there are vaccines that are already being tested at phase 3 and that is going to be rolled out globally next year. But we also has been reading that the distribution of vaccines are very challenging. I know from your point of view, especially you as someone who does procurement and distributing products on a global basis, where do you see all this coming into play? What are the challenges and issues involved in doing vaccine distribution?
So, Paul, I presume we are talking about the COVID-19 vaccines, right?
Yes.
Yeah. A very recent example. So everyone would have read about Pfizer's success in the late stage clinical trials with a 90+% success rate. So the vaccine will be one of the very first vaccines that could be deployed into the world. And one very interesting thing about this vaccine is that it actually needs to be transported below 70 degrees Celsius. So it's actually not a cold chain, it's an ultra cold chain. So if you think about it, from the point where you produce a vaccine to deployment across the world, you need the right kind of technology and the logistics and transportation systems that can ensure that there's no temperature excursion. So the vaccines needs to be done in a way where throughout your whole journey, temperature is maintained more or less within the band that is needed. And the interesting part about the vaccines is that it needs 2 doses for it to be administered, which means that even if you transport it to the same location, 3 weeks later, the second dose, you still need to aggregate the right level of people that have had the first doses to come forwards. So within the distribution chain, is something that could present new logistical opportunity in terms of technological constraints or new ways of doing things. And even in the dispensing of those vaccines, there is also other logistical issues in terms of identification of patients, in terms of getting everyone vaccinated in the right way so that the doses wouldn't go to wastage. So I think it's a huge challenge trying to vaccinate the whole world. And it's something that everyone, or I think every player in the industry, is trying to understand and learn about how to cope with that. But I think Pfizer is a good example of the vaccines rollout, prompting a lot of reflections about that. Yeah.
I remember chatting with you about this, and you were saying that vaccines come in a standard pack. I think you used the number 943. And then
Yeah.
you were also explaining that because it comes in a standard pack, it should be used as a pack and not separate. So in that kind of context, are we saying that based on whatever is going on today, if I send a bunch of vaccines into a place for vaccinations of the whatever population, and whatever is left behind as that vaccines that are not used will be wasted?
Okay, because that I'm looking at the facts that is coming through based on what we read on publicly publicly available. I think the real challenge about vaccines is to maintain the temperature. So if you are not using it or you are not using it immediately, so one thing is that do you have the storage conditions? Yeah, whether it's at a local hospital or clinic or dispensing point to actually store those vaccines properly. So temperature excursion is one important part, or the temperature stability is one very important part to ensure the efficacy of the vaccines itself. And I think the real challenge is to ensure that even within that batch, whatever doses that have been allocated is not being used up. How do we ensure that store it in the right way? There's a backup power system so that your devices or your cold chain device can actually store it over a period of time so that you can use it without wasting it. So I think that is the biggest challenge because today such technology does not exist broadly in most of the dispensing points.
I was reading something else. I was reading that Corning produced the glass, right? I believe the glass are the materials used to create the vials, and the vials are where the vaccines are being stored. Are you going to envisage that next year there is going to be a shortage of this kind of glass that's coming out in the market, at least as a materials?
I think there will be increased demand as you talk about because we never really, even with flu vaccines, there's really never a point of doing global vaccination over a very short period of time. So any manufacturers or R&D units that are looking into these areas will then actually press up demand or push up demand for glasses or packaging products in relation to the vaccines. So I think it's inevitable, but I also believe that this is being foreseen and the packaging materials manufacturers will be adding capacity on their end as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, Teo, I'm going to hold you for too long, but I got one last questions for you, and really because of the industry that you come from. How do you envisage the impact on, I'm going to use your word, life sciences and healthcare supply chain post-COVID? What is your view of what's going on, at least from your side, the procurement side, the manufacturing, the way it's manufactured, the ways these products are being manufactured, the trade wars and everything that's going on? Do you envisage like major upheavals in the industry in the next like 6 to 18 months?
Well, honestly, I think it's hard to tell what will happen. But if you look at the pandemic and what that has triggered for everyone, 2020 is a very unusual world. The whole world has been turned upside down, and I think that triggers a longer term question about what if it happens again. Our supply chain enough, our plans resilient enough, another wave of pandemic, especially country lockdowns or areas lockdowns are being used as an approach. So those are very disruptive to the supply chain, especially when you try to contain everything or workers go to factories to work. Then how do we ensure the supply of raw materials or packaging materials or services can go on undisrupted? I think it will prompt a rethinking about dual, triple sourcing, or also prompt thinking about how do you build your supply chains in a more stable and agile manner, and how do you actually leverage on the new logistical challenges or technology that surface the introduction of new medications. So I think all these are going to alter the landscape for the future, but any I think will take a period of time because of the lead time of regulation approval for the industry. So I think we are going to see changes, but I think structural changes will come when the world has a better understanding of how the vaccines will be deployed, and eventually what then will be the impact across all the different countries. Yeah.
Thank you, Teo. It's a pleasure to have you on live with us. This is actually a new show platform, and I really appreciate your support. I know our guys are going into the connection no good, on and off lagging. I apologize to everyone. Well, we do what we can, but for now, thank you, Teo. You have a good day. Stay safe, and then I'll see you again.
Thanks a lot, Paul. See you, everyone.
Restructuring the pharmaceutical supply chain from its current disparate, silo nature will be essential to addressing the key vulnerabilities exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Reshoring, while part of the solution, is not the only answer. In fact, comprehensive and ongoing supply chain risk assessment and planning will be crucial. Adoption of advanced digital technologies that enable true networking and data sharing across the entire supply chain will also be essential. So how are changes affecting the life sciences and healthcare supply chains post-COVID-19? The need to modify the pharmaceutical supply chain was well recognized well before the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. These include issues and challenges such as drug shortages due to quality issues at manufacturing sites in India and the closure of plants in China for environmental and other issues, heightened trade tensions, the shift in the industry to small volume, highly targeted medicines, the growing numbers of biologic drugs that require low temperature storage and shipment, and of course the rising demand in emerging markets in Asia Pacific and Latin America, and then the increasing problem of counterfeit drugs. The advent of personalized medicines and next generation therapies also comes with very different logistics requirements. And all this has been creating challenges and drawing attention to the need for enhanced supply chain management solutions for this particular sector. In fact, flexibility and agility are required across the entire supply chain for pharmaceutical and healthcare, from raw materials, intermediates, drug substances, and drug products manufacturing, to the production of materials and components of manufacturing equipment, to the design and even manufacturing of packaging solutions, and then on to warehousing and distribution of all these important items. The risk of supply chain interruptions can only be avoided if the challenges faced by the industry are addressed comprehensively. Anyway, that's all for our session today. Thank you folks for joining us and for your support for this program. Do subscribe to our channel as we explore other supply chain and logistics challenges in our next show. Till then, take care and stay safe. Goodbye.